What's going on, everybody? It's RoarYJ coming at you with a brand new video. So, in my last deck profile, being my Fluanderies deck profile, I said I'd be making more deck profiles specifically for decks that are fun but also still at least somewhat viable in this current format. So, of course, what better deck to showcase than the pet deck of the channel ever since we dropped Dinosaur, that being Bird Up. So it has been a couple of months since I made my last Bird Up deck profile, but the format has changed significantly since then, and so the deck has changed up a little bit in terms of mostly its list rather than the playstyle, because its original playstyle, at least for the last few months, has been incredibly convenient for this format due to being a very anti-tier way of play. I want to give an apology in advance if there are any audio or video issues. I am trying out a new angle for my camera and everything and my microphone, and it's also going to be kind of me placing the cards from an angle down under the lens, so it could end up looking a little bit jank. I'll try to fix it the best I can in post, but it might be a little bit of an issue. Also, before we get into this, I want everyone to keep in mind that this isn't like a deck that you should be using right now if you want to see like high-end success at a YCS or like consistent regional success or anything. This deck is more of a deck for those people that either have the deck laying around and have nothing else to play. They're not as sweaty. They maybe don't have the money lying around to buy something even like Flunder, because Flunder is still over like $150, guys. Like, you have to understand that. People are saying it's budget, but it's still 25 a piece, sorry, for each copy of Advent, and then like 40 per Prosperity. That's like already over 200 actually. So yeah, you can definitely see very high local success, or maybe even some regional success with this list, or any other similar list, just with the deck in general. Just don't expect it to be like stomping the next YCS, you know? But I don't want to keep you guys waiting any longer. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into my Tri-Brigade Lyrilusc deck profile for the November 2022 format. So starting off, of course, with our Lyrilusc monsters. Again, I'm going to apologize in advance if any of the placements end up looking weird, but we're starting off with 3 copies of Lyrilusc Turquoise Warbler, 3 copies of Lyrilusc Cobalt Sparrow, 2 copies of Lyrilusc Celestine Wagtail, 2 copies of Lyrilusc Sapphire Swallow, and 2 copies of Lyrilusc Beryl Canary. Guys, absolutely nothing has changed about our Lyrilusc ratios since the last video. So I have actually considered a few different ratios of certain things. Namely, I have tested out 1 Sapphire Swallow, and I even tested out 2 copies of Cobalt Sparrow, especially when I was thinking that Tenki was going to come to 3. But unfortunately, we're in a format where your opponent's probably going to be trying to mill out both players' decks very significantly. And while your Lyrilusc will most likely be getting shuffled back off the Mudora and the Keldo, because your opponent doesn't want you to special them from your grave off of your Turquoise Warbler or Beryl Canary, it is going to be a bit of a problem if you cut down on the ratios and then they end up getting dumped. We're also no longer playing Desires in this deck, at least for this format, due to all of the milling going around and because we needed room for other cards, and so we don't really have to worry too much about like losing our cards as well. But I don't know, I've always been on the heavier ratio of birds side of things. I know a lot of people have criticized that in the past for my videos, but I've always found success with my high bird ratio, though definitely if Tenki came to 3, cutting 1 Cobalt out is a pretty good option, because Fractal just serves as another copy of Cobalt and Celestine, and so having that 3rd Tenki will just kind of mean you already have an extra copy of this. That is going to do it for our Lyrilusc. Something that has changed, though, is our Tri-Brigade lineup. Starting us off, we have 3 copies of Tri-Brigade Fractal, and 3 copies of Tri-Brigade Nerval as usual, but we are also on 2 copies of Tri-Brigade Kit and 2 copies of Tri-Brigade Karis. Again, apologize for the glare on Karis over here. It's from my ring light. I have the ring light at a new angle. But yeah, so if you've seen my previous Bird Up deck profiles, you'll know that this is definitely a bit of an awkward ratio here. I've only ever done 1 and 1 of each Kit and Karis. I actually did try 2 Karis at one point, but it was a bit too niche and I ended up cutting it immediately. But this is, again, for the same reason as our continued large bird ratio, and that is due to all of the milling. Particularly because if you lose your Karis, like your single copy, you're going to be in for a very bad time if you're trying to combo, especially like say your opponent used Orange Light, now they're milling stuff from your deck and then you lose your Karis, or if they use Hobness and end up milling, and then milling from your deck and you lose your Karis. Like, without your Karis, it's going to be very hard to not only do your combo, but also extend through disruptions, which is something that the deck likes to try and do if it can. And then having the multiple copies of Kit not only lets you have an extra copy later on, but also increases the likelihood of your opponent milling milling it off of their things. So on either player's turn, getting a free kit mill to get another Tri-Brigade engraved, namely Nerval to get a search, is always really nice. For the miscellaneous Beast Warrior Wing Beast stuff, we have the 1 copy of the Fabled Cerbero, absolute star of the show as always. Look how shiny he is. I spent like $9 on this secret rare. But yeah, this helps you make your Arclight, and the deck honestly wouldn't be as good as it is without him. And for a rather spicy hidden tech that you probably already see on the sidebar, because I'm generous enough to put that sidebar up, but for this format in particular, I am on 2 main deck Neko Main Kings. So Neko Main King is a card that has been seeing some talk ever since the Dark World stuff was revealed for the structure deck, which is coming out next month, I believe. Like, that was revealed ages ago. But people have been talking about this card to be discarded off the Grapha because it treats it as the opponent's effect. And for those of you that don't know, Neko Main King says, during your opponent's turn, when this card is sent to the graveyard by the effect of your opponent's spell, trap card, or monster effect, your opponent's turn ends. I think the errata version says it becomes the end phase, but like, this is the same thing. So yeah, basically the idea is that while your Ishizu to your opponent is comboing off and milling, 5 to 10, even 15 off the top of your deck, you're going to hit this Neko Main King off of that. This is a mandatory activation. It'll always be Chain Link 1, unless they have a mandatory thing as well. But this will activate. It cannot miss timing. And basically, your opponent's going to immediately go into end phase. And I know there's a big argument about, oh yeah, well, Tier's just going to use all their effects during the end phase, If you've seen things like the YCS level events and everything, they just do stuff during the draw phase even that's really strong. And, I mean, yeah, that's fair. They can still go for their Rokalos, they can go for maybe a Dracus Tapelia, things like that. But we have to, remember, they were playing ignoring this card's existence, right? They are not going to get a chance to set any of their power back row. They're not going to be able to have a chance to set their droplets, their Solyx, their crimes, their meta noises, anything like that. All of those are going to be stuck in their hand and completely dead, while you have a bit more advantage than they do, because they have to use only the things that they already currently have on field, being their monsters, and any resources like Mudora and Keldo in their graveyard. So yes, while this isn't exactly like the supreme turn skip that people were either making it out to be or hoping it would be, it is definitely a powerful equalizer in my opinion, and it should be looked at as such. And it's not like it even has any bad synergy with the deck. It's not like it is a brick, yes. You do not want to draw the Neko Main King, not only because on its own it does nothing, and also you'd rather keep it in the deck, but it does have synergy with the deck in being a beast, of course, meaning that you can pitch it off of Karis or banish it off from your graveyard, to summon your Tri-Brigade Link monsters, but it's also a level 1. Meaning that in a pinch, you can actually normal summon this to go into your Lyrilusc plays, like your Recital Starling or your Assembled Nightingale for a quick Zeus. So while, of course, it is definitely a card you do not want to drop, it's not going to be the end of the world most of the time if you do draw it, and I think it is a very funny tech that you could play in Tri-Brigade variants this format. So that is it for the actual parts of the deck for the engine. Let's go ahead and get into the hand traps. I am on hand traps over board breakers. We have 2 copies of DD Crow, 2 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 2 copies of Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion, and 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. So these are what I've compiled to be the best hand traps in the format. DD Crow, of course, being searchable in this deck is really nice. It's also very good against Tier, so this is one of the main things that makes this deck pretty anti-Tier. Ash is actually a very strong hand trap in this format, believe it or not, because being able to stop a Shayran or even an Agito or Kelbeck mill could potentially make your opponent's turn a lot less explosive. Of course, it also hits, the Flunder cards, it hits your Gigantic Spray or any of your Sprite starters, anything like that, so that's really nice there. Ghost Bell is very good for Tier because it stops them from fusion summoning, of course, but it's also good against things like Sprite for due to Elf, which can prevent your opponent from getting a Toad. And Imperm, of course, is Imperm, stopping Flu, Sprite, stopping, all of your Kit Kalos plays and everything. Imperm is just a very good card, and it also serves to be a board breaker. Sorry if any of this sounds a bit rushed, by the way. I'm just kind of annoyed because this is technically the 3rd time I've recorded this bit, because the first time my camera stopped, and the 2nd time it wasn't recording at all. So moving on to the back row now, I have 3 copies of Lyrilusc Bird Call and 2 copies of Fire Formation Tenki. Very standard here. I'm very confused as to why Tenki is not at 3. They put Ben 10 to 3, which is a card they put to 2 at the same time as Tenki from Limited, but I mean, I guess at this point I'm just considering that Konami kind of forgot that it was still at 2 and just didn't put it to 3. I don't know. I feel like it wouldn't have done literally anything for Tri-Variants. It would have just made, I don't know, Lunalight try a little bit better, but, whatever. I guess you just can't take everything. For our Power 1-0s, we have, of course, Foolish Burial, 1 for 1, and Called by the Grave. Again, pretty standard here. Foolish Burial is an additional copy of Fractal and also helps when your Fractal gets murdered by something. 1-for-1 is one of the most broken cards in the entire deck, being able to not only extend you through hand traps or other disruptions, but also being able to potentially just do full combo off of it and something like Nerval. And then, of course, Called By is Called By. Finally, to wrap up the main deck, we have the 1 copy of Tri-Brigade Revolt. Not really going to say much here. It is just Revolt, and it is one of the best parts of your end board. So that is going to do it for the main deck. On to the extra deck, starting with our Xyz monsters. We have 1 copy of Lyrilusc Recital Starling, 1 copy of Lyrilusc Assembled Nightingale, 1 copy of Downerd Magician, and 1 copy of Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Sky Thunder. So a few things here. One, if you notice that there are different sleeves on certain extra deck cards, some of them are in my Flunder deck, and I really could not be bothered to unsleeve and then re-sleeve and then yada yada, so I just kind of slid them over. But also, for those of you that have seen my prior Bird Up deck profiles, you're probably wondering, where the hell is my Ensemble Robin? I've defended Ensemble being in the extra deck the past few lists, even though it's arguably like kind of an okay card without the protection from Samorg, or being at 4 stacks guaranteed. But I really did think it was a fine card. It was also a really cool addition to have on top of your established end board, and it was really good to go into in case you get all of your other things stopped, and you can at least go into it with your Barrel Canary. But as that gets harder this format due to all of your Lyrilusc names getting shuffled back for your Barrel Canary, and also the fact that Ensemble just isn't very impactful, you know, things like Kit Kalos are still going to resolve, and then they have it back in their extra deck. I mean, you can hit Gigantic or whatever, but between any of those, it's just kind of an card right now, because they just get their resources back, like the sprites and everything, and it's just really not going to do as much. Plus, I need to make room for another card with the extra deck this tight. Also, Zeus is just kind of okay right now against the Shizu tier. Like, you'd rather not use it against them because you're just going to trigger off like 18 different effects, but it is still very good against decks like Flunder and Sprite. So going into our Link monsters now, we have 1 copy of Salamangreat Almirage, very standard here, you know, normal summon Kit or Nerval, go into this, get Ashed and Cry, and then the thing that I cut the Ensemble for that you probably saw in the bar is 1 copy of Scareclaw Lightheart. So Lightheart is a very interesting card. So in a format like this, where your opponent is probably knowing that you're playing Tri-Brigade and is going to shuffle back all of your Beast Warrior, and Wing Beast from your graveyard as they can using Mudora and Keldo, being able to make the most out of your resources that you have and stretch them thinly is like super crucial. And what better way to take advantage of that than to use Scareclaw Lightheart? So sometimes, depending on what you have, you know, being like a Kit or a Nerval or something, if your opponent shuffles back all of your targets in grave for your things and you're left with like 1, then you can literally go full combo or go for an OTK just by having that 1 and that Tri-Brigade name in hand because of how good Lightheart is. It is also really great for a certain combo involving your Fractal getting hit by something, you know, like Orange Light, Ash, whatever. Anything that would stop your Fractal immediately. Opening Kit or Nerval, especially Nerval because you're playing 3, plus that Fractal that gets hit, this basically turns that into a really strong combo. I'll probably showcase that at the end of the video, so stay tuned there, but I found Lightheart to be a very nice card to have, especially as an extender rather than an end board piece in a format where your end board's already fine, and just getting extenders through all of the disruptions that's going to be going on during either player's turn is very important. We also have the 1 double Dragon Lords because it's part of your end board. It is a very strong card for protecting your Arclight, which is kind of like the main goal of the deck now, and it is also, of course, able to go and out the Barrier statue. We have the 1 copy of Farage and 1 copy of Bearbrum, very standard here. They are very good for your combos, of course. 1 copy of Horus Velgar, the Desperate Doom Eagle. So I don't remember, I can't recall exactly. I think I was still on Rugal in my last deck profile. If not, I was definitely on this, but this card is just so good right now. So admittedly, it is a lot harder to go into like hard making wise than Rugal, but the applications this card has against specifically things like Tier is just insane. So just being able to quick effect respond and shuffle an opponent's monster back into the deck is really strong. And remember, just like DD Crow, this also works with certain things, similar to the Alpha Tribute Ben 10 situation, where, you know, you DD Crow the Ben 10 because it was already engraved before it resolves. Well, say your opponent Orange Lights something like your Appaloosa, you can chain the Horus Velgar, targeting the Agito or the Kelbeck that they just discarded off the Orange Light, and get it out of the graveyard before they can do anything with the effect. Also, while it is very rare, this card can potentially get very large, especially against matchups like Flunder, where not only are they going to use the Barrier statue that this card completely like demolishes, but This card is super good against Flunder specifically because they're going to have no monsters in grave, and if they do, it's just going to be a shifter, which, I mean, if you got shifter, you're probably losing anyway. But if they have any monsters in grave, you can just spin it back, and this card's going to go up to 4,800, which is really, really large. So yeah, I really like Chris Velger, and if you're still on Rugal, I highly suggest you give this card a chance. Of course, we have our 2 copies of Tri-Brigade Shurik, the Ominous Omen. An insane boss monster, not gonna lie, especially right now where banishing removal is super crucial. Also non-targeting, so a lot of decks that are running things that can't be targeted in order to try to out-tier, because tier has a hard time outing non-targetable things. Non-target banishes are just insane, and this is arguably stronger to go into than Access Code, because Access Code pops, this banishes, and while it is a once per turn, it is still very strong. We have our 1 copy of Appaloosa Bow the Goddess for our M board. Appo is actually very underrated this format, in my opinion. Like, if you can protect your Appaloosa, this is really good against decks like Tier, because it doesn't negate and destroy, it just negates, meaning that they'll, like, the Sharon will stay in hand or whatever, or like the Merly they summoned is going to stay on field. The once per chain obviously does bog it down, like you can't negate multiple things in one chain, and chain blocking in general is kind of like weighing it down a little. Also, it being wind is kind of unfortunate because you usually end on this in either double Dragonlords or Hearst Velger, so Super Poly is a very potent card. But Appaloosa is just very good this format nonetheless. And also we have the 1 copy of Access Code Talker. Yeah, Access Code, much like Zeus, has fallen out of favor a little bit against matchups like Tearlament Ashizu, but it is still really strong against literally anything else and will be your main game closer. And finally, to wrap up the extra deck, we have the holy grail of your extra deck this format, that being the Herald of the Arclight. So yeah, Arclight went from being, you know, an Omni negate in a deck that lost its Omni after the banning of Samorg, to being the literal protect the castle strategy of this deck this format. So obviously, Ashizu tier is going to have a very hard time with Arclight, because Arclight hits things that are sent from hand and from deck, meaning that basically all of the tier cards will be banishing their resources instead, so they're going to want to out it. Well, thankfully, your end board ends on Appaloosa, DDL, and Revolt on top of this, so the Revolt and the double Dragonlords alone are going to be able to protect the Arclight from being ran over by things, and the Appaloosa can stop things like Sharon or any other extenders that would try to hit the board. So yeah, you're gonna like try to hold the Omni as long as you can, preferably, unless they have something like Evenly, of course. Or like, you know, in the Sprite and Flunder matchup, you'd rather just immediately shotgun the Omni on like the map or, you know, anything like that. But against the Shizu tier, your main goal is to keep this little bastard surviving as long as physically possible, so that your opponent has a hard time playing. Well, that is going to do it for the extra deck. So something I haven't done in a while is the alternatives list. So going on for the alternatives, so again, I did mention that this deck has a very good matchup against the Flunder due to the barrier statue and not caring about it. Well, what if I told you you could also play Barrier Statue? That being off of the Tri-Brigade Airborne Assault and Barrier Statue package. So for those of you that don't know, Tri-Brigade Airborne Assault is a quick play spell card. It says target a Beast Warrior or Wing Beast monster you control, and special summon from your deck with a different name, a Beast Warrior or Wing Beast, and with less than or equal attack, by the way, and with a different type than that monster. However, its effects are negated until the end of the turn, and you are locked into links for the rest of the turn. So essentially the idea is that you draw this on top of your full combo, you do all of your full combo, and right before you get locked with the Bearbrum, you activate the Airborne Assault targeting something like your double Dragonlords, special summoning the Barrier Statue from your deck in defense position. Its effects are negated, but next turn it will no longer be negated, which is very nice, giving you not only your full combo end board, but also the Barrier Statue, which is really good for stopping things like Sharon from hitting the board, which can out your Arclight. The main cons about this is that the Airborne Assault is technically searchable off of Bearbrum, but keep in mind, Bearbrum is going to be locking you into Tri-Brigades after you use her effect to search. So, I mean, yeah, you can get this Airborne Assault, but you can't activate it yet unless you're summoning a Tri-Brigade from your deck. And if you activate it during your opponent's turn, the Barrier Statue's effects are just going to be negated. So you have to rely on hard drawing it, so you have to play 2 or 3 copies, which could end up making a break in the long run. For an additional hand trap that you could play, Effect Veiler is pretty nice. It is a level 1, so it has synergy, though I do like avoiding things like Shifter, because keep in mind, Effect Veiler cannot activate under Shifter. If hand traps are less your style, and you prefer for a more aggressive going second approach, because going second is actually very fun this format, then perhaps you should consider some board breakers. Specifically things like Alpha the Master of Beasts, Triple Tactics Talent, Dark Ruler No More, Lightning Storm, Mystic Mine, and Evenly Matched. All of these cards are very strong in their own way this format. Alpha having synergy with the rest of your deck is really nice, and being a not once per turn for his special summon, giving you an additional really large body on top of your non-targeting bounces. Triple Tactics talent is very strong in this deck in particular because it is a deck that thrives off of being able to get extra advantage from their deck, because they can really play well through hand traps depending on what their hand looks like. And it's also really good to steal monsters and rip cards from hand, of course, especially in a format where your opponent's probably going to be using a lot of monster effects on your turn. Dark Ruler is definitely a bit weaker this format than it has been over the long run. However, it is still a very potent card and much better for this deck than something like Forbidden Droplet, because you'd rather not have to neg resources in your hand and definitely not your field in order to negate things. Lightning Storm is really good for hitting things like the Tearlament back row and baiting out things like Crime, while also hitting things like Empen as well, even though you have a pretty good Flunder matchup overall. Mystic Mine is of course Mystic Mine, and Evenly Matched is quite possibly the most absurd board breaker this format, being able to not only bait out Omni Negates if you haven't already baited them already, but also making your opponent banish their things, which means it outs things that may be unaffected, and also leaves them with just one card, and of course the banishing makes it to where your opponent can't use any floating effects. For some extra deck alternatives, of course we have our Lyrilusc Ensemble Blue Robin that you could still play. You could also play things like Mannequin Cat. Mannequin Cat is definitely much better suited to be in the Sprite version of this deck. However, it is still possible to make it in one of your combos in this strategy. For example, I will probably mention it in the Ash or Orange Light or whatever on your Fractal combo that I will mention with the Lightheart, because you can actually sit on this and summon a free Floodgate from your deck, which could be really good for your tier matchup. We also have Sprite Elf and Sprite Sprint as options you could play. Again, much better suited for the Sprite build, especially because they don't really have as much synergy with the Lyrilusc cards. However, it is still really nice to get free dumps and revives for your kits. Finally, if you're a player that's on a mega budget and still won't prefer to buy an access code talker even after its reprint in Battles of Legend Crystal Revenge, putting it at around $30 if I recall correctly for the pre-sale, you can play World Sea Dragon Zealantis. So Zealantis is a really fun card for Tri-Brigade specifically, because not only are you getting your battle phase pops and stuff, but you can use Shurig for a 1-card link 4 of this, which will then trigger the Shurig to search basically any Beast Warrior or Wing Beast in your deck, which could be things like your Barrel Canary or whatever to go into a multi-attacking Assembled Nightingale, And it's also really funny in tandem with something like a Bearbrum lock, which I don't know why you're going second and locking yourself with Bearbrum after making this card. But basically, the funny thing is that I was in a thread where I found out that the Marincess lock into water essentially means that you can make this, banish everything on the field, summon back all of your water monsters, and your opponent gets none of their non-waters back because you're locked into summoning waters. So the same can be said off of something like Bearbrum locking you into Tri-Brigades, so your opponent will not get any non-Tri-Brigade monsters back, meaning that you can successfully wipe their entire board. Granted, you probably did a lot of resources to actually go into that, because not only is your Shurig being used to make this, but you're also linking away the Bearbrum in order to actually lock yourself into Tri-Brigade. So while it is very unlikely to actually happen, it is definitely something that you can still do for fun. Well, everybody, that is going to have to do it for my Tri-Brigade Lyrilusc / Pertup deck profile for the November 2022 format. This was definitely a bit exasperating to record. I ended up running into a lot of hiccups, but I think I'll get it through in the end at least. I hope you all did enjoy. I really enjoy playing this deck, and while it isn't at like its peak or its prime right now, especially until we get another nuclear ban list that slows the power of the game down again, I still think the deck can actually do a little bit of damage in the right hands, and can probably win you your locals pretty consistently. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comments below, because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll put this video and the channel into YouTube recommended. And if you like this content and you want to see more like it, like the rest of my deck profiles, I'm going to try and get at least one more up this month from our friend Javon on the channel. He has a very spicy list that he wants to show you guys. That should be out later on this week. Then perhaps consider subscribing, because we are on our way to 2,500 subscribers by the end of 2022, which is approaching fast. It is the best way to support the channel more than anything else, and it will cost you absolutely nothing. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.